Assalamu alaikum, my fellow ladies and gentlemen. This is Sayyid Zain Ahmed. I have been a student of philosophy, history, and political sciences over the last few years loosely. I have been engaged in debate loosely again, and I will be the moderator for today's talk. Our speaker is Dr. Sayyid Mahbubul Hassan. He is an assistant professor at the Department of Philosophy at the University of Karachi. He is highly known for in his particular field for his works. He has taught at some of the top educational institutions in Pakistan, like FAST, like Zabis, like Karachi University School of Business and Sciences, and IBA and the College of Business Management. His other feats include strong command over multiple languages like French and Arabic. And he has also written many research reports that have been featured at different international forums. Two of his most international and recent works include The Islamization of Ilm, Ideals and Realities in a Globalized World, and it was published in Ilm, Science, Religion and Art in Islam. And the other work that he has recently published is Trends in Islam and Liberalism in Contemporary Muslim Subcontinent, and it was published in the Contemporary Thought in Muslim Subcontinent. Apart from him, we have Mr. Shujat Ahmed Zada. He is a representative for the ICYF slash ERC, and he is going to be the program assistant. Right now, I would call Mr. Shujat Ahmed Zada to please start with his opening remarks. Sir.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Um,
Walaikum assalam.
Dr. Said Mahbubul Hassan and Mr. Zain Ahmed, I would like, and the organizing team, I would like to welcome you and I would like to greet you all on behalf of the Eurasian Regional Center of ICYF. My name is Shujat Ahmed Sada and I am working at ICYF ERC as project assistant. Unfortunately, today we received very tragic, sad news from brotherly country of Pakistan. As you know, due to aircraft crash happened in the city of Karachi. So that's why the immediately Eurasian Regional Center of ICYF and its board issued a statement about that very tragic loss. And I would like to first read that statement and then proceed to the our event, with regards to our event. So the board of Eurasian Regional Center of ICYF sharing the grief of the brotherly Islamic Republic of Pakistan and expresses its sincerest condolences to the families and relatives of those who died in tragic crash happened close to the Karachi in the residential area on the 22nd of the May of 2020. May Allah the Almighty have the mercy upon the souls of the victims and rest their souls in the peace. Amen. So with regards to our event, as ICYF ERC, which is the Pakistan is our mandated country, we are very glad that we are working with this bright and open-minded and clever organizing team, National Model of Pakistan, Model OIC Pakistan, and personally, myself and all the Secretariat of ICYF ERC is very thankful to them for doing very great job. As we know in the episode first, they did very well job and we received a lot of positive feedbacks about the episode first, and I'm very sure that today's session will be more productive with the participation of our esteemed doctor. And as you know, topic is very important for today's debates, Islam and democracy, and from the point of view of the philosopher. So I think that will be very interesting, and we are looking forward to implement more joint activities with National Model of Pakistan with this bright team for the common betterment of the use of Pakistan. So I don't want to take too much time. Again, I would like to share my personal and organizational condolences with the brotherly people of Pakistan. And in this event, I would like to wish you all the best and ongoing success. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your remarks. Um, with this, we are going to move to Dr. Mehboob. Before that, I would be giving a bit overview of this talk. So right now, what we plan is that we are going to be discussing democracy from an Islamic perspective, and we are going to relate Islamic history and our Islamic systems to the modern concept of democracy, and we are going to discuss whether this modern concept of democracy is the ideal concept of democracy, and whether this democracy aligns itself with our Islamic systems. Also, we are going to understand why having such discussions at such forums is important for us, and we are going to try to dissect different myths about certain systems that we have implemented, we want to implement, or we are going to be implementing in the future. And with this, our esteemed speaker, Dr. Mehboob, would be present with us to be guiding us. And with this, I would be moving formally to you, Dr. Mehboob, to help us out and to please give your remarks on why having such discussions is important and what you have in your mind regarding this whole scenario. Sir, can
Bismillahir
you hear me?
Rahman. Yes, I can hear you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. First of all, I think it is very important to share our sympathies and our condolences with the effectees of the plane crash in Karachi. And just for your information and knowledge, actually, I am right now located because my house is located here at Karachi airport. So it happened just a mile away from us, and by the grace of Allah Almighty, it has protected us. But at the same time, there was the mercy of Allah Almighty in the sense that some lives have been affected with this. So we really share our condolences with the affected families, as well as we pray for all those who have been martyred in this tragic event that took place. Uh, as well as I would like to extend my deep thanks to Mr. Pasha, who has just spoken to us, as well as your organization, the committee, and the people who are involved in this entire organizing stuff. And they have managed to reach and discuss and deliberate on these issues. And more importantly, they have picked up such an important issue, which is really attractive to a young Muslim who is either being brought up in Pakistan or in third world Muslim states, or states like I would say where democracy has never been a dream coming true in any form whatsoever of the word sense, as well as in Turkey and some other states. And not only that, it is also equally important for all those Muslims, whether they are laymen or young students who are getting education in Europe or in Anglo-American sites, where Islam is considered to be an important frame of life, as well as it is considered an important worldview by which things could happen. And the youngsters, they are actually looking at Islam, and they are trying to make their way up to the standards of the civilization, whether it is possible or not. Of course, we shall discuss every bit of these things, but this is really significant, not only from the perspectives of the speaker, who is coming from Pakistan, predominantly a Muslim majority country. At the same time, it is considered as an ideological Islamic state, as well as our moderator. But at the same time, it appeals to a youngster who is brought up in USA or in England, as well as in Turkey, as well as in Iran and some other Middle Eastern countries. So it is highly important and significant. Why? Because democracy is the most important ideal with which not only the Western but the non-Western countries and societies they feel proud to associate with. Now, what is the reason? Of course, we shall discuss that. So that's the importance of this topic. That democracy is something that makes things legal, that makes things normative, that makes things ethical. Everybody likes to pursue that discourse or course of life.
Thank you so much, sir. Um, given given the whole overview that you have provided, I would like to commend you because you have not only provided with a very sound definition of democracy, but you have also told that why it is so important and relevant in modern day world, and why it is equally important for Muslims to be discussing it for a better future and a better society. With this, sir, I would be moving to my second question, which is about a brief overview of democracy. So I would be requesting you to please give us a brief overview, as it would be called, about democracy, how it was conceived as an idea among the classical period. Is it in continuity from primitive times? And I would be very thankful to you if you also relate it to some specific philosophers, some important philosophers from the Islamic era.
I think it's very important thing that we need to discuss. Why? Because unless and until we relate democracy as a normative system or anything that we want to pursue in our life, or we want to check whether it is consistent with our worldview or not, uh, how it has been occurring or happening in our history. I think the most important thing that our youngsters need to know, as this forum is trying to address to them, youngsters who might not have the background of the political science or IR, they might be coming up from sociology or cultural studies. Many students might have very less information how democracy moves on. Of course, it is the song
Many
that is
many
that
might be
is
coming from STEM systems. I'm saying many
yes.
might be, yes, STEM
Yes,
systems.
exactly. As well as, it is a song that is sung by everyone without knowing who is its author and what are the norms and values. So therefore, it is very important to get to the history, how it has emanated, or it has sprung before us. So let's start this story of the democracy, and I will definitely link it with the history of Islam in the beginning also. But before we do it, I think let's get back to Greek philosophers. As you know, the Greek philosophers are very known for their respecting of the reason. They have been considered as the propagates as well as the advocates of the reason. And among them stands out Plato, who was the student of Socrates and who is the teacher of Aristotle, the great Aristotle, who had ruled over the almost the entire world for more than 1700 years single-handedly, be that the Roman Empire, be that the Christian Empire, I mean, almost the Middle Ages. It was just Aristotle, and not only that, there has been a recent rise of Aristotelian philosophy, mostly chanted by Alasdair MacIntyre, who was the Canadian philosopher. Again, there is another gentleman. His name is Charles Taylor. So there is American Harvard professor. His name is Michael Sandel. So all of these communitarian philosophers have again went back to Aristotelian norms. So Aristotle is highly significant. Now, let's get back to Plato. Plato, as we know of his very remarkable work, was Republic, and that is the only work that is valued very much in every social science, most importantly, and political science more importantly. In Republic, he is seen to be condemning democracy. So one can understand that democracy has roots, it has conceptual stuff among the Greeks, but Greeks were not valuing democracy. Now the question arises: what was being, how the Greeks were actually conceptualizing and looking at this system of the government. What was wrong with that? Why did they not love as we love today a democracy? What was wrong with that? According to Plato, people should love or they should organize their life uh, on the principle of good. Mark my words, good.
Right.
So the life should be organized around the principle of the good rather than on the principle of right. This debate would re-emerge among the liberals, the contemporary liberals, who would be changing this relationship. They would insist that right must dominate over good. It should be the prerogative of the individual's right to define their own good.
So this means that the real debate falls down to the supremacy of right over good or good over right.
That's right. I mean, that is the point where people can easily reduce these debates on their fingertips. Though I mean, the debates could be very spreading all over the places. But more important thing, one can reduce and make. I mean, to have an understanding of that is just to play with these, at least with these two principles. Is it the priority of right over good, or vice versa? So for Plato, it was the priority of good over right, which is to say that every single person must know what is the concept of the good, right? And
Right.
once you come to know about it, then you are allowed to exercise the power. So democracy was believed to be a system that disrespects the good and overemphasizes the right. And if it is done, that would actually make the society vulnerable to bad effects. There was another, I mean, from Aristotle, we draw another thing, which is, the achievement of the happiness. That is the sole purpose of a society. Every single society must go for the achievement of the happiness, the ultimate principle of our purpose of living. Now, happiness comes from Aristotle. The ideal love for the truth comes from the Plato. Now, the most important thing about democracy is what? According to Plato, for example, this is quite common in our societies. For example, we are from the subcontinent society, we can easily relate it. Many times, our forefathers and our parents forbid us from doing something, so many things. They say, no, that's not the right thing. And many times they don't explain it. And we say, no, this is our right. But our society has experienced for the centuries that whatever our parents or grandparents are saying, they might be carrying some experience. They might be they do have a concept of the good that this should be practiced in that way. So, right cannot allow us to know the good unless and until we have the knowledge of the good. So parents are given this right because they know the good, and we actually, withdraw our rights many a times. Similarly, it happened at the society level when this coronavirus was all around. States issued the law to stay at home because the state believed that it knows the good and the welfare of the society, and the rights should be suspended because the citizens might not know, because they might be simply looking at, very closely and immediate needs, but the society, the state might know better than the citizens, the individual citizens who might be very much engaged in their business activities, and they might be overlooking the welfare of the other individuals. So state comes in. So that's the concept of the good. When the society believes that it has a concept of the good, so the exercise of the power should be allowed on the principle of the good. And democracy, on the contrary, was such a practice which allows the citizens to practice via their rights, whatever they like. And democracy at the same time was that form of the society or the rule or the governance in which people are allowed to pursue their desires, whatever they desire, and state is simply, or the society is simply to facilitate that process. Plato hated that. It said no. Principally speaking, people should be pursuing the good, and the good is only known to a few people who are the philosophers, and he had introduced the concept of the philosopher king. So the right to exercise power should be given to the person who knows the more, who is a philosopher. So philosophers were given right, and they were somehow treated as elite, a certain background, certain having a knowledge. So those who are philosophers, they are normatively allowed to rule over the people who do not know what is the good. So in this particular context, democracy was conceived among the Greeks, right? So do you think that it is okay and it makes sense to all the think that there is something which is unclear, so I can make it clear, and then I will be going to the classical period of the Muslims.
So I would only request you to please elaborate a bit on just like you pointed out the recent pandemic. I would only request you to differentiate between the good and the right a bit more, just a
Okay,
slight bit more.
this has been a bone of contention in the entire group. The businessmen are the believers and the advocate of this position, as well as the citizens are of the advocate of the position that the state is not supposed to tell us what is good for us. Pandemic is there. We know that there are certain principles, that we know that there should be a social distancing, we should be wearing masks and stuff, and we will be taking care of you. We will be taking care of ourselves. There is no need for this state to tell us that what is good for us. So allow us to work and behave the way, allow us to live a life that is normal for us. Now, state takes that responsibility, as it happened in China and other countries too, where they say that the citizens cannot have that information, that access to the knowledge of the good that we have, because we have a broader and a perspective which is more than a single individual can know. So therefore, we are in a better position to know what is good for the welfare of the entire citizens, for the countrymen, as well as for the individual. So we would advise, and we would implement it by force, by law, that the citizens should stay at home in order to protect themselves from the losses of the virus, as well as for the welfare of the other citizens who might be exposed to that. So good is understood and is imposed by the state, and the right of the citizen to define what is good is actually suspended. And here, the libertarians might be objecting that it is, allow us to decide whether what is good for us. For example, if I want to live a good life today, and even if I'm exposed to the coronavirus, I don't care. But my life would be, flawless, and my life would be very better life, because this is my choice. So libertarians might object this way against Chinese government or any other government. But those people who advocate the priority of the good, they would say no. It is better for the society to implement good and suspend the rights that are given equally to the system, because they do not know what is good for them. I think.
That
Yeah.
yes, that has been very helpful, and if you it would be very helpful for us if you link it to very prominent Islamic philosophers as well. If
Yes.
you
So
link
now
the whole topic.
thank you very much. Now, that was the debate that was happening in Greece. Plato, Aristotle, they were discussing these issues about the organization of the society. And then, of course, we know that the birth of Jesus Christ happens, and then the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alaihi wasallam comes to the scene, and we know that he proclaims his prophethood in 610, and then finally he migrates from 622 from Makkah to Medina, and in 632 he ends his mission because he passes away. Now, the society that was constructed and established in Medina, that happened between 622 to 632. And it is considered among Muslims, it is believed among the Muslims that it is an ideal society, an ideal state. And there are many features that needs to be noted at that time, and that remained ideal for the Muslims in the entire their political scenario as well as their social scenario. One of the most important things is the unity between religion and the politics. And what is it? Prophet enjoyed religious authority. For example, if you ask about what is anything about the religion, so Prophet is the authority. He would be telling you the truth. What is the intent of the God? What exactly God wants from the Muslim? So Prophet is the authority. People would get back to the Prophet. They would inquire from him, and Prophet would be telling, and they would be taking it as very seriously. And the only legitimate authority on the face of the earth is the Prophet. So the religious authority. But when Prophet comes in Medina, he establishes a state, a city-state, but a state, but it was expanding from its border onwards. Okay. Here, Prophet acts as a political leader also, the political authority also, and here the political thinkers, draw attention to the to the students that look at in Prophet. There comes the unity of the religious authority as well as the political authority. Now, from 632 to 662, I mean 30 years, and in these 30 years, the Sunni Islam believes that that's the period of the successors of the Prophet, right? Now, the successors of the Prophet are considered that they have founded the society of the Muslims on the same footprints of the Prophet. And these 30 years, it is believed that Muslims develop their society as well as a state in the same spirit and in the same way. So the caliphs were also looked at from the same perspective, the political authority and the religious authority. And in simple terms, whenever, for example, anyone is living under the age of, for example, Umar ibn Khattab or Abu Bakr Siddiq, radiallahu ta'ala anhum, any citizen could get back and they could take advice from Umar ibn Khattab or Uthman ibn Affan that, I need this to understand from the Quran or the Hadith. So they were treated as the religious authority. But at the same time, they were also enforcing those laws, the laws from the Quran, the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Hadith, whatever these sources were there. So again, you could see the unity between religion and the politics is seen to be united in these personalities. So one can say that here the good dominates over the right. Nobody has the right to define the Quran or the Hadith or the Sharia. It is the Prophet or the successors of the Prophet. Now, then we move on to the Umayyad period that begins around 662 and that ends somewhere around 750. Now, in this period, you could see there were many debates that should there be a separation. So many thinkers began to recognize that this needs to be separated. Because the Umayyads, many of them, they were sultans. They were not the caliphs because they no longer enjoy the religious authority. They were simply they had the political power and the political authority. So one sees a kind of a split between the political authority and the religious authority, right? So one of the defining features that we see in the Umayyad period is this separation that was earlier considered in the time of the Prophet and the time of the Rashidun to be united. And then again, we see another kind of a shift in the Abbasid period that began somewhere around 750 and that ends somewhere around 1258. And here again, we see a kind of a separation, a very well separation. But there were many compromises thinkers. For example, Al-Ghazali comes and he says that the caliph should be treated as caliph, but he has not that religious authority that the successors had, the Rashidun had. And then again, Ibn Taymiyyah also comes and he tries to get back to the same religious idealism, political idealism, and he kind of sort of political realism is interpreted in the sense that needs to be reformed in such a way that we get back to the same period of the the Rashidun. But again, we see some sort of the the compromises in them. For example, we see that there is a Al Ghazali compromised in the qualification of the caliph, and so does somewhere Ibn Taymiyyah also. He compromised in the qualification of that. So, in a nutshell, one can say that in the 14th century, the 15th century, you could easily see that the ideal unity between the religious authority and the political authority, that was the feature of the early, somewhere around 40 years or 50 years. And then there comes a sort of a decline that separated these two ideal, these two political and the religious consensus, or I would say a synthesis that started to depart and break down. And then we see, and then a lot of compromises were made in these theories, but still Sharia, or I would say the religious side, started to dominate, because that was something by which the entire Muslim society used to identify itself. I think Rosenthal is a very renowned, I would say, a historian of medieval Muslim thought. He notes that it was Prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam who actually, from all diversities of the beliefs, practices, and the modes of life, it was his conception of the ummah that actually, made the Muslims, lifted, number one. And that lift of the concept of the ummah made Muslims, allowed the Muslims to think about, more importantly, about these concepts in that way, in which they could still hold themselves accountable to the caliphs and the rulers, as well as they could easily measure by the yardsticks of the Sharia, because of this concept of the Sharia. So Sharia comes some sort of a yardstick by which they could easily measure, they could easily talk to the people, and they could give guidelines to the common Muslims.
Thank you so much. The description and the answer that you have provided is very helpful, even for a layman to analyze the contemporarily popular philosophers in the light of what has happened in the Islamic history in the past. And I believe that, given the lines of ideas or ideologues that you have provided, uh, a layman can actually guide themselves better on the concept of democracy. So, with this, I would be moving forward to my next question from you, which is about the definitions of democracy, but not for the layman. I want to inquire if there is a specific definition of democracy for the philosopher's mind, and if we can define it as a form which has values and norms, or is it a mere process? Can you please help us regarding that, sir?
Okay, so it's a fantastic question. It's a very, very relevant question. And many
Thank you.
times when there is a discussion about democracy, and more importantly, when there is a discussion between the compatibility between democracy, Western democracy, and Islam goes on, you see at stake happens the definition of democracy. And if you review the literature that has been produced within 200 to 300 years, you would see that at stake is the definition of democracy. And very interestingly, things get more complicated. That is there any consensus on, or is there any universal definition of democracy even in the West? So you would be surprised to know that there is no universal definition in the West also. Recently, I was just looking at a book that was produced by Dreisig, who's a very known philosopher on deliberative democracy. And the very first sentence that he produces on democracy, on the definition of the democracy, is he acknowledges that there is no definition of democracy. Now, the question arises that if there is no universal definition of a democracy, then what is this all about going on? Is there a compatibility between democracy, Western democracy, and Islam? Is there any Islamic democracy? Is there, a kind of a, harmony possible between these two concepts or not? So debates are going on. So the very first thing that a student of democracy or a student who is interested in these debates is that he has to draw a line or a kind of an order that, whenever democracy is defined, what is its definition? From which perspective democracy is being discussed? So, as a rule of thumb, we would say that there is no universal definition of democracy. Like many times in the Western tradition, it starts with sort of, the rule of the law, the rule of the people, by the people, for the people, as Abraham Lincoln illustrated. That's a very popular sort of a definition. It has some weight in the sense that many Western scholars as well as Western audience believes that a system of governance or a system of organization of power in which people are given autonomy to decide for themselves. Again, I would get back to the same comparison stuff: right versus good
Right
versus
versus
right. So many Western authors believe, and many Western scholars and audience believe, that when autonomy is given to any individual at equal plane, when the decision that is imposed on us, that should be dependent, that should be consulted or legislated on the basis of my input into that. For example, any law is being made. For example, should I be wearing seat belts or helmets while riding on a motorbike or driving a car? Should I be wearing it or not? So instead, it is being imposed on us via law. It should be consulted first from us, from the citizens themselves. Do we want that? Do we think that it is good for us in the future or not? If this concept goes around, so democracy is basically thought like that. That any legislation should come from us. So, in simple terms, the insight of the democracy is the self rule, that we shouldn't be ruled by someone who is outside us. We should rule on ourselves. We should be commanded by laws that are made by us, by the humans, okay, by the cultural norms that we subject to, or that we ascribe to, or that we value ourselves. So that's the bottom line, at least in the West. That self rule is called democracy. Now, whenever that's a very small definition, I would say. That starts the discussion rather than ends the discussion. Why? Because the moment you start at self rule, what does it mean by that? Should there be the governance of the majority? If there is a governance or the majority rule, the problem start to appear. What is it? Is it the rule of the majority over minority? Would minority be suffering? Has majority accommodated the minority, their desires, their rights? For example, the very first dissident come around is of the women voice. Whenever the decisions are being made, where is the women voice? Aren't we suppressing? Are we suppressing the voice of the women? Are we suppressing the voice of the minority? Are we suppressing the voice of the marginalized stuff? For example, nowadays, environmentalists raise this thing, that whenever the construction and the legislation was being under process, the environmentalists were not heard. The immigrants were not heard. The women was not heard. So accommodate these because they were living at the. So the very first definition that comes in the West is self-rule, but self-rule give rise to some other contradictions built in this problem, that if the decision is going to be made on the basis of the majority, it many a times violate the rights of the minority, and the minority, since they are equal people or human beings, they should be treated equally, and they should be accommodated rather than forgotten. Then there is another layer of democracy discussions, and that is very important. Is it a process, or is it a set of norms? And very recent debate that took place between Khalid Abul Fadl, who is a representative of Muslim theologians as well as Muslim legal thinkers, and set of other non-Western non-Muslim thinkers as well as among the Muslims, including, for example, Esposito is a very renowned Muslim scholar, scholar on Islam, as well as Jeremy Vedran, non-Muslim, but discusses democracy from a liberal perspective. Nadir Hashmi, Sabah Mahmood, and you just named they were. In that discussion, it happened that when Khalid Abul Fadl was trying to define democracy around norms, around the norms of the Muslim theological background, theological grounding. So Jeremy Veldron objected on that and said that isn't democracy a process, a fair, a transparent process? So that shows you that democracy is not simply a set of a definition that starts, but it should also be looked at from the process perspective as well as the normative perspective. Similarly, there is another very impressive, I would say, political thinker, I would say, Ian Shapiro. I mean, he's teaching political thought at Yale's and right now serving as a professor. And he also advocates this thing that, the dichotomy or the clashes or the battles between the liberals and the communitarians, that can only be solved via democratic process. For him, again, it's a process, but this process is informed by the norms of the West, and he, excavates his way from the battles of the liberals and the communitarians, and he indicates very, he has a point to make. He says that the Enlightenment goals, the objective of the Enlightenment that the West had pursued from so many centuries. There were many achievements of that Enlightenment goal. So Enlightenment goals and anti-Enlightenment concerns both could be achieved via democratic process. Now, what is this democratic process? According to Shapiro, basically it is a process in which structured instability of power relations. Mark my words. Structured instability of power relations. In simple terms, I would say, according to Shapiro, democracy is a process in which power does not concentrate anywhere, number one, and it is constantly mutating in such a way that power ceases to concentrate anywhere. So it is a structured instability of power concentration. So this is how he tries to define democracy. So on the one hand, it shows democracy is very important because post-liberal, communitarian clashes, one of the suggestions that is made by Ian Shapiro is democracy. Secondly, it should not be treated mere as a process. This process is informed on the normative foundations. And then when discussion moves on, as I mentioned, Khalid Abul Fadl, he also seems to be believing that process is secondary and derivative. The norms from which it emanates or from which it derives its suggestive processes, that they have to be normative. And there is insight, Zen, also here that needs to be taken into account.
What just happened?
For 5 seconds.
Zen, as I indicated earlier, that there is some truth to this bifurcation between the process and the normative. Why? Because many Muslim states, many Muslim countries, for example, Pakistan, I certainly believe that there is a democracy, but it is not coming from our roots. Why? Because it is not associated with the norms that we subscribe to. And for this reason, democracy looks to be very superficial. It doesn't look to be, paving the way for our, moving forward. And for this reason, this distinction needs also to be taken fully account of whenever we discuss democracy.
Thank you so much, sir. I believe that, personally speaking, in my own opinion, the way you linked it with Shapiro's definition that the ideal concept of democracy is zero concentration of power anywhere, that pretty much sums it up. Even for me, because I would in front of you, I would grade myself as a layman, and that has been very helpful. Thank you so much. With this, I am going to be moving towards our next question, and that 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 relates with more concepts. So, on a conceptual level, what are some of the hurdles that an individual may come across while trying to reconcile these two concepts, the Islamic system and the Western system, and if we try to draw parallels between them, or if we try to align them on some certain levels?
Okay, Zan, I might take a few moments more of you, but I think more important thing in this discussion between Islam and democracy is it our choice? Is it our call? That's very important. We have noticed this in the history that after 1980s, we see there is a rise of the urge of the democracy, and that had erupted because of the two works, Clash of Civilization and End of History, and that they have actually projected a criteria of civilization is what that they should have. There should be a democracy. But for example, from my perspective, if we look at, is it our call or not? We need to decide that. Why? Because if autonomy has any meaning, if human dignity has any meanings, so it should emanate from ourselves, from our needs. We must understand that. Democracy, if there is any democracy, if one scholar or the other scholar paves the way for the harmonization between Islam and democracy, that is not going to work. That hasn't worked so far unless and until it comes from inside. So we have to decide this, number one. And many times we cannot decide it. That's a very interesting point. As we know that in 1948, there was Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to which we call UDHR, that has turned into a kind of code or legal form in 1966, ICCPR, International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, and then it was turned into a legal form in 1976. The point that I'm trying to stress is what? States have been given this signal very explicitly and clearly that if you sign this contract or this treaty, you would be given access for the free trade in Europe and in some other parts of the land. Now, if democracy and the protection of the human rights is associated with the capitalism, with the business access, with the trade, so it is going to compromise human autonomy and the state's autonomy. So, what I'm trying to say is these are the hurdles that need to be addressed. And unless and until they are not addressed, we cannot find a real collaboration or real effort to draw to similarities or differences or sort of engagement with the democracy or not on the foundations of on our historical roots. So then I think the very first thing is that it should be a real challenge. It shouldn't be dictated. And we have noticed this that over the passage of time it has been coming from outside. And very interestingly, you could also notice this. It has been pointed out by many thinkers like say Ziauddin Sardar and Nader Hashmi, that many a times we find that the authoritarian regimes are also supported by the Western civilization or the representatives of that civilization. And here you draw a kind of a contradiction that if democracy is the right system, why the authoritarian and the totalitarian regimes are being supported, by the Western metropolis or on the name of the civilization. So these contradictions need to be looked at very carefully whenever we are discussing democracy and Islam.
Thank you so much for
And there is
some.
another very interesting subtle point, if you allow me to say.
Yes, sure, sir. Please go on.
Then there is very interesting point that has been highlighted by Khalid Abul Fadl, and I think that's a remarkable piece of work that I shared with you with the challenge of the democracy by Khalid Abul Fadl, a discussion that was recorded by the Boston Review. Khalid Abul Fadl indicates a very subtle point in contemporary democracies. And what is it? He points out that the problem is not with Islam. Of course, there are theological foundations, according to Khalid Abul Fadl, in Islam by which democracy could be substantiated, could be constructed, It's not there, could be constructed. But he identifies that the modern state system has actually made ulama slash legal scholars its salaried class, which is to say that he compares that in the classical period, the Islam Muslim jurists, they used to be mediators between the state apparatus and the citizens, and they were not given salaries by the state, and they used to mediate in such a way that wherever they find a state to be transgressor, they used to indicate that, they used to stop it, and whenever they see that there was unfair call from the citizens to go against the state, they used to stop that. So a kind of a mediation, a fair mediation, a just mediation. But in the contemporary system, Khalid Abul Fadl identifies that the scholars, the Muslim jurists, they are actually working for the expansion and for the deepening legal power of the state. And that actually makes the citizen vulnerable. And for this reason, he advocates that there should be a system of the law and not formal and abstract legal system of the law, protection of the law. Instead, it should be very effective that the citizens of that state should be practicing those laws that give, in case of any sort of an infringement on the behalf of the citizens, so the state should be protecting the rights of the citizens. So that should also be kept on check in the sense that it is the state and its salaried class that does not allow democracy to creep in and kick in the system. I think I'm
That
clear.
yes, yes, sir. You made it very clear, and that the added comment, it was very helpful in a number of ways. This idea that our jurists are salaried and hence directly or indirectly working for upholding the sanctity of the state is
And
going to
if I could clear, I mean, they are not jurists. For example, if you see in the seminaries, the jurists are teaching classics and they are giving
yes,
fatwas. He's not talking about them. He's talking about those jurists or Islamic muftis who have been hired by the state. For example, we have right now in Pakistan Islamic Council, Islamic Ideology Council, and there may be some other staff who are paid by the state, and they serve on the behalf of the state. He's indicating that, not, I mean, unpaid,
yes, not
unsalaried people,
yes,
free.
yes. So with this, I will be moving forward to the last question of our talk, and that that sums up how that discusses contemporary challenges to democracy as well. So my question to you is, how can democracy with its contemporary challenges be a way forward to state affairs? How can we go right and how can we go wrong? So and what
Okay.
is the critique to democracy in this particular sense?
Then, from my perspective, if you look at, I would always say that it shouldn't be taken as a dictation from outside. It should be it should be considered, our autonomy. Our autonomy to decide what is good for us. Number one, if it is dictated on the name of the trade, on the name of the access to the European markets, that would actually not produce a very conducive environment to think and construct democracy in its true state. Secondly, should it be the mimicry of the West, as it has been suggested by many thinkers? I would suggest that it shouldn't be mimicry from the Western systems. Be that a normative process or just a simple transparent process. I believe that if there is any sort of a democracy, which is yet to be excavated, as Khalid Abul Fadl says, but if there is any sort of a democracy, it should emanate from our roots. And by roots, I would mean that, for example, we are living in the subcontinent. The Sharia that is interpreted by looking at the sensibilities and the local realities of the subcontinent, the Sharia should be interpreted accordingly. And then from there, you can build on a system which is very friendly to our people, which could resolve our problem. And according to many Muslim jurists, it could help us to achieve that happiness or the saada that I mean Farabi talks about, and many other thinkers also talk about. Ghazali also talks about saada, the happiness, the greatest telos or the purpose of the Muslims that needs to be taken into full account. Unless and until we take that, I think, and then there is another feeling. That's my insight by looking at and engaging with the scholarship so many. We should also be very much aware that the scholar, one should has to be somehow take a distance from the scholarship also. So I am an academic, and I would people would be surprised that why am I advising that, because many times the interests of the scholars might be very different from the interests of the practitioners who really want to do something. And many times you see a kind of a gap between a scholarship as well as the practice. So if you really are interested to do something, the practice, so that should be somehow a careful distance. I don't say absolute gap between the scholarship and the practitioners, but a careful distance, a very informed, careful distance from the scholarship, because many times I have observed that the scholarship is very misleading because they need to produce work, they have to compete for the individuality, the uniqueness, and the work may be unique and may earn the scholar his status, his place in the academia, but that might not be as practical as it should be. So we should trust on our local scholars, stop, importing scholarship, and be a very careful distance with the scholarship, and try to do something, engage with the local people, have discussion, discuss the merits and the demerits of the stuff, and then we can move on. So a good deliberative practice that needs to be taken into account while going for the options that whatever are open for us.
So uh, the the differentiation that you gave between the academia and practitioners, I found that as food for thought and as the subject of our next discussion,
Inshallah.
and that inshallah, and that is that is a reflection of a very unbiased approach,
Mm.
in my opinion. I honestly speaking, I could collect on the breadcrumbs that you were leaving throughout the discussion. But this one particular idea was totally new. This is that the scholarship have vested interests, and then again, the work they produce might not be relevant for the good of the society. And I think that pretty much sums it up, because we're not only talking about scholarship, we are talking about practitioners, we are talking about the state paid jurists, and then we are talking about the ideal jurists that we need in the society. And then again, all of this revolves and dissolves around to the whole concept of vested interests. So that is a very good note to not only end our conversation, but to build our future conversations from. And with this, I would be verily thanking you, Dr. Mehboob, for giving us your time and sharing with us your intellect, education, and research. And maybe I would want that for imparting a great impact upon me as a person, as an individual, as a student. So,
Thank you, Zen, and your team also. They have been very kind and they have shown hospitality towards me. And thank you very much. And I hope that the discussion may be a kind of the beginning of thinking about the democracy and Islam, as well as I also believe that this initial engagement might take on us to some other lands which are more rich and more generous, more maybe more productive in the future.
so with this, we are going to be concluding our conversation over here. And to our viewers, I would request you to please like, the video, comment and share, and please inform us with your critique and future questions or the topics that you would want us to be addressing in our future talks. With this, have a good day and have a good and safe life ahead. Thank you.